Once again, welcome. Thank you so much for joining us for an evening of poetry with Stuart Kestenbaum. I am going to now turn the program over to our representative, Barbara Lawrence, who is here from our partnering organization, the Stewardship Education Alliance, to tell you a little bit more about her organization and an upcoming program called Poetry on Windows. Barbara, it's your turn. Go ahead and unmute and take it away.
Okay, am I unmuted? Can you hear me?
Yes,
Great.
you are.
Well, good evening. Thank you so much for joining us. Julia, you have been extraordinary. You have been a capable ally in putting all this together and other programs, and I just want to thank you and the library for making this all possible. The mission of the Stewardship Education Alliance is to increase community awareness of ways to be better stewards of our local watersheds. We do that by awarding grants to teachers in public and private schools, independent schools, for projects that they request that further our mission, and also by holding community events like this one. When a group of Camden residents started S.E.A. a few years ago, it just served Camden, but in January of 2020, we became an approved nonprofit organization and welcomed Rockport to join us. This was, of course, just before COVID struck. In January of this year, the board voted to expand to include Appleton, Hope, and Lincolnville. So we now work with 11 schools and 5 towns. And we were very pleased in March of this year to award 8 grants to schools in 4 of these towns. So please visit our website. I think that Julia posted that before. I also invite you to S.E.A, which will be held at the amphitheater on June 4th. That's not this Friday, but next, from 1 to 4:30, and that's the start of Camden is Blooming, so there'll be a lot going on in town. This will be an environmental fair with representatives of many organizations that work to be good stewards of the environment, and there'll be activities for children and adults and a drawing for what we're calling outdoor prizes, including day trips aboard schooners, kayaks, a harbor cruise, and there's even a drawing for an overnight trip aboard the schooner Mary Day. So please join us. But tonight is about poetry, using our hearts and minds to explore our relationship with our environment. This evening is also a complement and the launch to the S.E.A. event Poetry on Windows, which was created by board member and teacher Alfie Owen and S.E.A.'s Vice President Wayne Ruswick last year in response to the pandemic. It's a visual celebration of World Oceans Day and of our environment. Maine Poet Laureate Stewart Kestenbaum graciously agreed to launch this 2-week-long celebration, and I am absolutely delighted to introduce him. So it's my honor and pleasure. Stewart Kestenbaum is the author of 6 collections of poems: Pilgrimage, House of Thanksgiving, Prayers and Run-on Sentences, Only Now, How to Start Over, and his new book, Things Seem to Be Breaking. He's also written The View from Here, a book of brief essays on craft and community. He was the director of the Haystack Mountain School of Crafts in Deer Isle for over 25 years and was elected an honorary fellow of the American Craft Council in 2006. He's written and spoken widely on craft making and creativity, and his poems and writing have appeared in small press publications and magazines including Tikkun, The Sun, the Beloit Poetry Journal, and the New York Times Magazine. And he's currently serving as Maine's Poet Laureate and hosts Poems from Here on Maine Public Radio, Maine Public Classical. Former US Poet Laureate Ted Kuser has written, quote, Stuart Kestenbaum writes the kind of poems I love to read, heartfelt responses to the privilege of having been given a life. No hidden agendas here, no theories to espouse, nothing but life, pure life, set down with craft and love. So welcome, Stuart, and thank you for helping launch this year's Poetry on Windows.
Thank you, Barbara. Thank you, Julia. Welcome, everybody. Thanks to the Camden Public Library. So I'm going to read you a selection of poems that might mirror my journey to Maine. And so the first poem, I first came to Maine when I was in high school, but in college I made the journey of hitchhiking New Jersey to Maine. Hitchhiking was easy in those days, pretty much. I got a great ride all the way from Boston, thanks to a radio station, all the way to Route 1 and Route 3 by what's now the Big Apple Variety Store, where in Orland, Bucksport, and got a ride to Fly Point, where I was visiting my friend. And I didn't know how lucky I was to get the rides that I got. The last ride I got was I was picked up. I had a guitar and I had a backpack with an aluminum frame, and the mosquitoes had just discovered this boy from New Jersey and were about to devour me. And this car stopped because they thought my guitar was a cello and that I was a music student at Kneisel Hall. Otherwise, they probably wouldn't have stopped, but they stopped. So I lived to, write another day. And this is a poem about that experience and about writing. And it's dedicated. The title of the poem is To Alice, Who Taught Me About Poems. And Alice Hildebrand, who is a fellow writer, was the person I was visiting. To Alice, who taught me about poems. I remember when we would stay up all night, heading down to the village to watch the baker make the donuts, the greasy O's rising miraculously in the oil. I'm sure he was wondering why jerked up college kids would come down the hill to visit him. He was at work while we were at discovery. Some jobs can be discoveries, not like the ones famous scientists make, but like those I made before I visited you that summer. I was working in the gas station, learning to stop the pump just right on the dollar, not going over by a penny, or cleaning the windshields with a squeegee, the water running down like a light show on the shadow of the dashboard. I hitchhiked from Boston to Maine to visit you at your cottage, getting a long ride in a hippie's recycled delivery van, past the hulks of the schooners rotting in the harbor in Wiscasset, past the souvenirs in Perry's Nut House in Belfast, until I was dropped off on Route 15, still 40 miles away in the mosquito-filled dusk near the humming and flickering lights of the gas station, like an Edward Hopper painting come to life. How is it when night comes on, we can feel so alive? The darkness is surrounding us and we're standing with our hopeful thumbs out, waiting for a ride. So I've already confessed that although I am at the tail end of my service as Maine's Poet Laureate, I am from New Jersey originally. That wasn't a question they asked on the Poet Laureate application. I would have been disqualified immediately, although, New Jersey is, I think, the only state that names highway stops after poets. There's a Joyce Kilmer stop and the Walt Whitman stop on the iconic New Jersey Turnpike. So not many states can boast that, I don't think. But, driving around Maine, I'm always taken, I think, from my very first visit and till this day, of the kind of starkness of the landscape, which I love, the way the light is, and just the quality of the built environment and the houses. And a few years ago, I wrote a series of poems kind of thinking about houses and how we have names for houses, like a house of Thanksgiving, a house of prayer. I'm going to read you a few of those poems, which I think the landscape figures in. This first one is called House of Thanksgiving. In the house of Thanksgiving, I have seen the angels late at night, the incandescent light still on downstairs. They are writing psalms with quills they pull from their wings. They toss crumpled drafts into the wood stove, and smoke rises from the chimney, still holding the shape of the words, then feathers out into a gray landscape. The soot makes a film on the shrubs. These angels sing their songs of praise until they have moved past irony into full-on love and kiss one another with passion and become like children at a family gathering, running from room to joyous room in the circle of downstairs. If I watch them all night, at dawn, I see the birch branches shaking in lavender light, like fine capillaries where this world flows into the next. And if I step outside my own house, I can hear them laughing and hear the heavy thud of their footsteps in prayer. This next house poem is called House of Mourning. House of Mourning. There is only the damp stone darkness, no light at first, just the sound of the women wailing, which begins as a low moan that grows to a howl, as if time and again they are building a wind out of grief. They are the ones who give birth to the ones who suffer, and so make this ancient music for the children, the brothers, the soldiers who die for nothing or something. If you look up to the few high windows, you can see bare apple trees or the delicate white flowers in spring trembling slightly against a sky full of rain. Rain makes a muted sound against the slate roof and runs down the stone walls, as if each drop were a river carving a canyon of loss. There are no men to be seen. They are outside with their shovels, burying someone or planting seeds, calling on the earth one way or the other. The women walk out to join them in these fields, miles of treeless landscapes spreading out to the horizon where days begin and end and sorrow approaches from all directions. I wrote that poem a while ago, but sadly, it feels like I wrote it yesterday. And this is a third one in that sequence. It's called House of Prayer. Inside the house of prayer, the ancient ones rock slowly back and forth. They have been praying since just after time began, when the sun, new itself, rose on the first day after humans were created. Even way back then, there were fervent wishes. The path to the house is worn and rutted. Outside the barn are two silos full of prayers, a satellite dish with channels upon channels for sending and receiving. Bales of old prayers bank the foundation for winter. Over time, the broken and the restless make pilgrimages, each with their own hearts to pray for. Inside, it is nearly silent except for the faint sound of lips moving and an occasional moan of sorrow or remembrance. And then there are the prayers that get jumbled, like leaving the right phone message on the wrong answering machine, only you don't know it and can't take it back. This is what has happened throughout time. It gives us what sympathy we have. Don't search for your own prayer with your name sewn in the back. Don't try to find the pure thought that danced from your lips. Think of the person who wanted what you've gotten. Think of healthy children, plentiful food. Think of a man in another country who can finally weep, who is watching the sunrise on the only day there is. So I was the director at the Haystack Mountain School of Crafts for 27 years. And during that time, I had the opportunity to be around a lot of creative people all the time. And I couldn't always do my own writing, but I was around a creative process. But occasionally, I would also invite people to be visiting writers, which gave me the opportunity to write with the writer. So I was working, but I was able to do some of my own work too. And one of the writers we had was the poet Kim Stafford, and he, in a workshop, just gave a prompt. He said to write a run-on sentence, which I'm sure you all know what it is, and which many English teachers fret about and hope will always leave our writing. But to me, it seemed to fit my run-on mind. So it felt like a perfect marriage of form. It was my sonnet. And so I began to think of a series of poems called Prayers, and actually became the heart of a collection of poems called Prayers and Run-on Sentences. And I'm not sure I could tell you what a prayer is. Maybe it's like Potter Stewart, the Supreme Court Justice, when he was asked to define pornography, and he said he couldn't describe it, but he knew it when he saw it. He couldn't define it, but he knew it when he saw it. I'm trying to get at in the prayers something that stops time and stays with the moment and goes as deeply as I can, I guess is how I would say it. And this first one grew out of, when I was young, one of my favorite things to do was gallop and skip. And I find that we've lost that. Most of you, I'm looking, I bet you don't do either right now. And I would say, as therapies go, it hasn't hit the New York Times yet, but I think that skipping and galloping therapy could be the next big thing, because you feel it's it's not directed. You're just going, and there's a joy to the just going of it. And you can move pretty fast too. So when you go back to the airport for the first time since the pandemic to fly, and you get through the security, gallop to your gate and see how you feel and see how people look at you too. So this poem is called Prayer. Our problem, may I include you, is that we don't know how to start, how to just close our eyes and let something dance between our hearts and our lips. We don't know how to skip across the room only for the joy of the leap. We walk, we run, but what happened to the skip and its partner, the gallop, the useless and imaginary way we could move through space, the horses we rode before we knew how to saddle up, before we had opinions about everything and just loved the wind in our faces and the horizon in our eyes. This next one is called April Prayer. Just before the green begins, there is the hint of green, a blush of color, and the red buds thicken the ends of the maple's branches, and everything is poised before the start of a new world, which is really the same world, just moving forward from bud to flower, to blossom, to fruit, to harvest, to sweet sleep. And the roots await the next signal, every call, a miracle, and the switchboard is lighting up and the operators are standing by in the pledge drive we've all been listening to. Go make the call. And the last one in the prayer sequence, well, actually there's two more, but this is a winter one written in Bangor. And the other thing I was after is to think that holiness is where you find it. And I think that's what maybe a poem can point out to us. Prayer in the Strip Mall, Bangor, Maine. The week after Thanksgiving, and the stores are decked out for holiday shopping, including a TJ Maxx, where what was once too expensive loses its value and attracts us. There's a store with a big yellow banner proclaiming giant book sale, a seasonal operation of remaindered books, which doesn't mean that the books aren't good, only that the great machinery of merchandising didn't engage its gears in quite the right way. And I buy 2 books of poetry and I'm leaving the store, the first snowstorm of the winter on the way. And as I get to the glass double doors, a bearded man with a cane is entering. He has been walking with a woman who is continuing on to another store, and he has the look that could make him either eccentrically brilliant or just plain simple. And as I open the door and he opens the other side, he turns and says, I love you, not to me, but calling back to his friend who is departing. Only he said it looking at me, closest to me, which is unintended love, random love, love that should be spread throughout the world, shouted in our ears for free. I saw him one other time too, but he didn't tell me he loved me the second time. And this is a slightly longer poem in that same book called Litany. Bless us with the first breath of morning. Bless the packet of seeds for the garden, shaking like a shaman's rattle in prayer. Bless us with spare change in our pockets to give to the homeless. Bless us with a heart that has been serviced by the mechanic. Bless us with good tires on the icy road. Bless us so that we're not just covering our own asses, but weeping for the rest of the world. Bless our tears that they irrigate the land for the starving, that there be no more drought. Bless us with one idea after another that we might sort out the good from the bad. Bless us with free lunches and subscriptions. Bless us with a winter storm so big that it closes everything down for a week and we can find ourselves at the beginning of time. Bless us with water, bless us with light, bless us with darkness, and bless us with language. Bless our tongues that we can speak. Bless our cars so they start. Bless our computers so that they may connect to the internet and bring us the news of the universe. Bless Robert Bly and Gloria Steinem. Bless all the worn out athletes whose bodies are falling apart. Bless the tides twice a day and the moon every month. Bless the sun, bless us as we are blessing you, for this is a two-way street after all, and we're in this thing together. Bless mass transit and the first cup of coffee. Sing, O ye frost heaves and icy patches. Praise the spruce trees all crowded together, the crows in the trees flying heavenward and earthward, flying everywhere in between. Bless the night with its constellations that we have dreamed up. Bless our stories that they may somehow be true, for this is all we have. Bless all creatures great and small, and the basket makers who weave together a framework to hold emptiness. Bless the empty spaces that are within us, between each cell in our body, and in the vast distances between each cell. Bless each cell, which is its own universe, ready to divide, split in two, and make more than enough. After I left Haystack, I was a visiting writer at the Penland School in North Carolina, which is a school similar to Haystack. And it was a treat for me because I didn't have to worry about anything about how things were going, and people had what they needed. If their mattresses weren't good or bad or whatever, I just was there to be a writer. And so I decided to visit the different studios, and at Haystack, I had always used the opportunity of having the groups come together to read poems, because I thought, well, here's a good chance to read a poem to somebody who might not be expecting it, and they might like it. And if they liked one, they might like another. And eventually they would buy books of poetry, and poets would become rich all over the world. And so when I was at Penland, one of the teachers who was teaching a workshop that session was a man named Bob Ebbendorf. And he asked me to read poems to his class because he had been at Haystack a number of times. So I read a poem, and one morning he said, "Oh, you know, Stuart, you're like a tinker. You're coming here with your wares." And I said, "Well, if I were a tinker, you'd actually give me broken things and I'd make it into something. I repair it. So why don't you give me words, and I'll come back the next day with a poem." I don't know why I said it, but they did. And so it was great. It was a perfect deadline. And what I liked about it was that the words themselves were not mine, but it allowed me to think of them in a way I never would have thought of, because I never would have thought of that word to begin with. So I built a whole collection, the book How to Start Over, kind of out of that. I got words from them. When I got home, I wrote to my friends, and I got words from them. And I would always be random. I would just pick the words at Penland. People would give me words. I wouldn't know what they were, and I would just look at them, hopefully include every word. If I found a scrap of paper and had a word on it at the very end, that would be a dangerous moment, because I'd have to find a way to fit it in there. But I'll read you a few of those, and I don't think you have to know the words, but I'll tell you what they are anyhow. And the first one is called Decree. And the words that I was given were: sliver, dog, evoke, marriage, equality, pizza, emulate, Newtonian, swim, cupcake, delirium, and loose leaf. Decree. Let there be equality in every marriage, and let love emulate Newtonian physics, falling down to earth from the heavens, so that we will understand that a pound of love drops at the same rate as a pound of iron or a pound of feathers. Only when love lands, it breaks into slivers of hope. Let the dogs roll in the shards and begin to trot deliriously in search of crusts of pizza and cupcake wrappers, and swim to the land of dead things to roll in, for hope is eternal in all our hearts, animals and humans alike. And while we're at it, let's gather up the love and put it in loose leaf binders and page through what was. Let was become is. Let our hearts learn to be. And then occasionally I would travel to be a visiting writer, and people would give me words before I got there because they knew I was doing this. So it was, I haven't done it for a while, but it became kind of a way I worked for a while. And in this poem, the words I was given were memory, money, logarithmic, time, smoking, unseen, perfection, discovery, flow, travel, scent, growth, talking, passing, intimacy, tangled, serve, recovery, collecting, and Oprah. So sometimes you think, good, I can use this, this, and this, and then you'll have Oprah. And then you think, well, what am I going to do with Oprah? You can always find something to do with Oprah. Discovering fame. Back when there were stage doors, you were standing outside one in the alley, smoking a last cigarette, waiting to appear on Oprah. The smoke flowed through your body, and you exhaled the perfect O's, which traveled down the narrow space between the brick walls. You were passing time, wondering what the two of you would be talking about, what she could possibly want to know about your tangled, unseen life, the intimacy of recovery, or the scent of money you were making. Remember that day you were collecting yourself, waiting to serve up your memories before a national TV audience, making logarithmic calculations about your soul's journey into the bright lights. And this series of poems kind of coincided with the last presidential administration. And I seem to have a handle on darkness. And this poem's called How to Start Over. And the words that I was given were pinhole camera, sharks, deteriorating, evergreen, silky, sleep, cement, row, serendipity, flight, moonbeam, gawk, thistle, satisfaction, worth, and conflagration. How to start over. We knew things were deteriorating, Gothic houses collapsing, sharks patrolling the lagoons, the born-again ministers warning of an immediate conflagration. All the flights to paradise had been canceled, and even pinhole cameras weren't letting light in. It got to be so bad we didn't want to listen to the news anymore, where all we were doing was gawking at someone else's trouble. It wasn't worth the effort. Where was the satisfaction we longed for? We couldn't sleep, so would spend all night watching the full moon's beams cement themselves to the silky water and travel for miles on the waves. Someone was rowing along the shore, and in the silver light, the evergreens were shaking slightly. At the edge of the forest, the thistles were attaching themselves to the fur of animals. What serendipity to hitch a ride to your future. And one group of people I asked for words that were people who were physicists at MIT. So I got a really funny collection, not funny, but like a different collection, the kind of words when you look them up in the dictionary, they don't exist. You have to, and so I'd asked them for them, I had to use them. So I had to find a way to put them in the poem and define them at the same time. And this one, the words were lifting, sniffles, balance, rest, July, Ramallah, auxetic, Iceland, aggregate, forgotten, and forgotten. And auxetic, auxesis is when something, a cell expands but doesn't divide. And when Neil Gershenfeld, who sent me these words, said, oh, I've always wanted to see if somebody could use these in a poem. And they're all like thixotropic was another one, words like that. Our sickness. Who doesn't know that we are lost, that we have forgotten if we ever did know how to balance? The doctors who should be prescribing rest are telling us that this is auxesis, that our cells are growing without dividing, as if we can't become anything different than what we are. These aren't some sniffles we're talking about. This is the aggregate of our own darkness. Even though every day people in Ramallah want nothing more than to eat dinner with their families, even though off the coast of Iceland, the cod are ready with their millions of eggs, even though July wants to be a simple month, school's out, humidity lifting, a boy tossing a baseball in the air. So as poet laureate, I was never called on to write a poem for the governor, except for one time, which was to be for the bicentennial for Maine Statehood Day, which is March 15th, which is which didn't exist in 2020 because everything was canceled. So I got the poem ready, but I never got to take it out into the world. And my term as laureate and officially ended in March, although if the governor needs a metaphor, she might still call on me now because there's not a new laureate hasn't been selected. But this is the poem that I wrote for that occasion. And maybe I'll deliver it other places, but you're the first group here on Zoom. And it started actually when I was thinking of beauty salons in Maine, how many there are, and the great names they have, like, Cut Above, Curl Up and Die. There are other ones. Like law firms never think of funny names for their law firms. I think it would be better, like, what could be one, like Sew and Sue, and it could be like Weaving and Law Together. Or anyhow, I just was thinking of them, and you see them everywhere. So that was the spark for the poem. Kingdom of Beauty. There are so many beauty salons in Maine. You see them everywhere, in old brick buildings of refurbished downtowns, in strip malls, in trailers, in cities and villages. Our beauticians must be doing more than cutting hair. They must be making beauty itself. How else to explain its abundance all around us? The way the first light of morning touches the tops of the spruce trees across the harbor, or the mackerel sky blankets the heavens, or the way the fog drifts over the barnacles, working quietly in the waves without us. How else to account for the blue light in the deep snow, the soft drift of fallen apple blossoms in May's air, or the crimson of the blueberry barrens where the glacial boulders work their slow way over the land? Even if our beauticians haven't manufactured all of this, and we gratefully acknowledge the touch of the divine hand wherever we look, they remind us that our hands can help make beauty too. We can see the evidence everywhere, in the circles of burned rubber made by the pickups dancing over the blacktop, in the curve of a canoe's bow rippling a silent lake, in the space inside the split ash basket, in the prayer of a white steeple, in the patched quilt on the bed, in the sure way an elegant knot is tied to hold a load on a trailer. For aren't work and beauty a partnership? Think of the hands that held the chisels and wedges to build foundations of granite block. Let us praise the ingenuity it takes to cut and lift and place ancient stones to bear the weight of the present and the future. 200 years later, a house still standing, faithfully greeting today's light. So now I'd like to go to the visual part of the program. And this is a work from my latest book, and they're all blackout poems. And I started making them again when I was at the Penland School. And my wife, Susan Webster, and I were teaching a workshop together with writing and images together. And so we're thinking of different exercises to do. And Susan said, oh, let's do like blackout poems. And she made a template. I had never done blackout poems, and I wasn't that comfortable with them, but she gave everybody a template, which was about like 3 inches wide. And then we found, old books from the dump or the Take It or Leave It building, and just wanted to trigger people to find words that would make them alive to language. So I thought, well, I should do this alongside the class, because that's what you should do. You should model good behavior. And so I did that. And the first one I did, the only words I left were, it was a small pond. And then I had rubber stamps with me, like the ones you see here. And I thought, oh, Thoreau's Dream. So I stamped it was a mat that size that Susan had cut out. And so I just stamped Thoreau's Dream. So it was became like a kind of like a haiku, like a kind of call and response between the text and what I wrote. And so, Julia, you can just start to go through these. And so I began a whole series, and this is the book that I wrote or blacked out, called Things Seem to Be Breaking. And for me, it becomes a different way of working because I'm going with as little as I can to see what can make sense to me. And I move the template around a page of a book a random book ranging from Dick Cheney's autobiography to evangelical end of days books. And then after I see the phrase that speaks to me, then I think of something that would respond to that. So I think of myself as a poetry worker in the CIA. I'm redacting everything. So the book itself has 62 images, one on each page. And I use a Sharpie marker, have to hold my breath because they're kind of noxious. And a lot of these were started in the last administration, but they seem to fit both that administration and the pandemic. And I'm not a visual artist, but I really enjoyed having like a visual side to my work, and wouldn't have done it if Susan hadn't developed that activity. So I think that's probably a good place to stop. If you want to get past the letter E, because you're in alphabetical order, I guess you'll have to buy the book. And I think there might be a link on the website. I don't know.
There is a link on our website. Yes.
Yeah, it's just like a talk show. So, yep. So I will just I'll conclude with two poems, one prayer poem, and then which is called Prayer for Joy. What was it we wanted to say anyhow? Like today, when there were all the letters in my alphabet soup, and suddenly the J rises to the surface. The J, a letter that might be great for Scrabble, but not really used for much else, unless we need to jump for joy. And then all of a sudden, it's there and ready to help us soar and to open up our hearts at the same time. This simple line with a curved bottom, an upside down cane that helps us walk in a new way into this forest of language where all the letters are beginning to speak, finding each other in just the right combination to be understood. And then the final poem is called Holding the Light. And when I was at Haystack, I'd be around a lot of visual work and would sometimes collaborate with people working in craft media, adding text or writing something. And one time a friend, a glass worker named Kate Rhodes, asked me to write a catalog poem instead of a catalog essay. And that's where this poem came from. But I think for me, it speaks to this idea that of what role we can play in making the world better in some way. It's obviously a pretty daunting task, but if we all just pick one little part of it, perhaps we can get somewhere. And in Judaism, there's a precept called Tikkun Olam, which means to repair the world. And that's our obligation. So you just do the best you can to repair what part of it you can. And this poem's called Holding the Light. And it's actually going to be on one of the windows somewhere in Camden, I think. Holding the light. Gather up whatever is glittering in the gutter, whatever has tumbled in the waves or fallen in flames out of the sky. For it's not only our hearts that are broken, but the heart of the world as well. Stitch it back together. Make a place where the day speaks to the night and the earth speaks to the sky. Whether we created God or God created us, it all comes down to this. In our imperfect world, we are meant to repair and stitch together what beauty there is. Stitch it with compassion and wire. See how everything we have made gathers the light inside itself and overflows. A blessing. Thank you.
Thank you, Stuart, so much. I invite anyone who has questions for Stuart to go ahead and type them into the chat box now. Stuart, I want to reassure you that I do lots of skipping and galloping because I have 6-year-old twins, and that's pretty much just the way we move. All right, let's dive into some of these questions that we have here. Elfie asks, what has it been like to be the Poet Laureate? Has it informed your poetry or your perspective? And if you could just talk about that experience.
Sure. Well, you know, it's opened up doors for doing projects. If I just said to somebody, well, I'm a poet, I got an idea for a project, I don't think I would have gotten in the door necessarily, but like I approached Maine Public Radio about doing poems from here, where I read a poem a week, and having the title, I think, helped me, you know, get enough attention to be able to do the project. And a number of projects like that, like there's a series of a podcast that I did with young writers from the Telling Room in Portland, and that's on the Telling Room website. And then we did an hour-long radio program on Maine Public called Voices of the Future, which was also interviews with those kids. So, you know, it allowed me to, if I thought of an idea, I could act on it, which was great. And people were very supportive. So that was great. And I think in some way it makes you realize you're, you know, I'm representing myself as a writer, but I'm trying to represent writers in Maine to make people aware of the history, and strength of writing in Maine. And I think I would always try to find a place where people are scared of poetry. I mean, you're probably not scared unless you just logged into the wrong meeting and you just don't want to get out now. But it's just like, you know, somebody says, I'm going to read your poem, you go, oh no, I'm not going to get it. Oh no, his voice is going to go up at the end, you know, all things like that. And so I thought if you could just have somebody hear a poem when they weren't quite expecting it, that it could change something in a little way, you know, like, so with the radio program, somebody's driving in the car and they hear a poem, they didn't tune into the poem, but they heard it. So to just get people before they were scared, you know, when they just could listen, and then they could go somewhere with it. So to try to create moments when people could listen to poems.
Well, I certainly remember listening to many of the poems as they came on NPR while I've been driving, and have always been delighted to hear them. So thank you for doing that project. That was excellent. Elfie writes, Holding the Light will be displayed at the Page Gallery in Bayview for Poetry on Windows. So yes, if anyone wants to see that in large print, please visit downtown Camden during the Poetry on Windows for that poem and many others. She also asks that the poems about liturgy and prayer make me curious about your religious or spiritual background and upbringing. Could you talk a little bit about that and how that's influenced your work?
Yeah, well, you know, I think that the liturgy from synagogue has always stayed with me. There's a kind of repetition to it. I would say our family was semi-observant, you know, pretty observant, you know, and I can, you know, read and speak and write Hebrew okay. But I think just it's the kind of like repetition, some of the language of the Psalms, those things, I think really, I wasn't conscious of at the time, but the older I get, the more I'm aware of that. But not, I wanted to have a little darkness to it too. Like, I don't want it to be just like holiness. Like, I want the angels to have like soot on their wings. You know, I want it to be about who we are now too. But it definitely has had an impact. And you know, with the writing and the projects that I do with Susan, and I will do visual work together. And I'll actually hand letter things. And I think of the way, like on the Torah scroll, when you see it, like the way words spread out sometimes because it's a justified text. So I think those things kind of play in my mind.
Thank you. I also wanted to personally ask you, so you mentioned that, you know, you were surrounded by visual art for so long and that you have contributed words and sentences and poems to other people's work in collaboration. Is this the first time that you've done a combination of you know, craft and poetry together entirely yourself?
The backup poems, yeah. I mean,
Wow.
Susan gave me the format, you know, with that. And then, then I just had done that on my own.
Do you feel inspired to do more collaboration of the two, of poetry and art?
Yeah, we just had a big show at Cove Street Arts. It's down now, a combination of the Blackout poems, but then also work we've done together. And we have work at the Brickstore Museum in a gallery, a show called Mending.
And you said it was Cove Street Arts?
It was at Cove Street. Yeah, it just came down.
Okay, yeah, I remember when I was looking at the material for your book. By the way, but if you visit librarycamden.org and you visit the calendar and you see Stuart's event today, if you click on the description, there is a link to where you can purchase his new book. And there's also within that link, there's a link to Cove Street Arts if you'd like to.
Cove Street has all the you'll see images from the Blackout poems, but also some pieces that Susan and I did together that we call fragments, where it's part of a fragment of a print she made, where I then improvised text the same size next to it, with a dot, making letters that are all dots with a micron pen. So I don't know what I'm going to say except I get started. I have to end, and it's a one shot. I find it thrilling.
Well, I definitely look forward to seeing more combinations of this poetry and artwork.
Field goal kicker, I think. You just got, that's it, one shot.
Okay, so Maureen says, thank you for sharing your work. I've loved hearing your voice reading other people's poems on the radio, but I've never heard your own poems. I will read more now. We also have Elfie asking, I would love to know your writing process, your writing routine or process.
So would I.
It's not wake up every morning at 6 o'clock and just go.
When our kids were younger, I would get up in the morning. I'd write in the mornings. But working in the morning is always best for me. Lately, I've been writing essays, and I find I'll ponder those for a while before I get started. So it really varies. I don't think I'm consistent, except I just keep at it. But I do think I just wrote an essay that's going to be in the Union of Maine Visual Arts, Maine Arts Journal in the summer issue about mark making. And in it, I just talk about actually making these improvised texts that I do with the micron pen. And I think the lesson for me is that with that, I never know where I'm going to end up, but I get started. And I think that's probably like the process is to get started. I think not the process isn't to say, well, I'm just waiting for the right moment, or I'm waiting for this, or I'm waiting for the first cup of coffee, or I'm waiting for whatever it is. Really, you just got to get going. And I think, especially like working with the found words and things where I couldn't, there were parameters that you just getting going, that you trust that you're going to discover what was inside you that you didn't know. When I do that, I feel thrilled by it.
Well, it's excellent that you give yourself the time to indulge that and to do that. It's very important. Thank you so much, Stuart. I have enjoyed this immensely, and I look forward to sharing this program with others who were not able to make it tonight. I do want to turn the program back over to Barbara for a moment. She would like to introduce another poet who is involved in the Poetry and Windows project. And once again, Stuart, this has been great. I find your poetry accessible, relatable, and at the same time awe-inspiring. So thank you for what you've been doing.
Thanks everybody for coming, or at least your names came. I don't know if you actually came.
Oh, they're here. They're here.
Beautiful sunny day in Maine when you could be doing something else like being eaten by black flies. You decided to do this.
I think they were all in for a treat tonight, and they got it. All right, Barbara, it's your turn if you'd like to introduce Brian. Brian, by the way, you'll be able to unmute yourself. I've made you a co-host.
Well, I feel very badly about this because Brian and I have been communicating, but some of my emails didn't get to him, so he didn't have the right time for this. But Brian, if you would just wave your hands so everybody knows who you are. Brian is a poet who led a program of pilot program for us of workshops with the 5th and 7th grade students at Camden Rockport Middle School. And we're hoping to do this at a much larger scale with all 11 schools next year. All the principals have said they want to be a part of it. And he's the lead teaching artist in the telling room and on the Maine Arts Commission roster of teacher poets, which is how we found him. He received his BA from the University of Warwick in England and an MFA in creative writing from the University of New Hampshire, and has written many published poems. The most important thing to me was that I've had a long career in education, and I've traveled all over the country looking at schools and doing studies with teachers. I have never, ever heard so many people, so many students be so excited about what they had, the work they had done in a workshop. And Brian, it was magic. So thank you for that. You literally have 1 minute or two, and then we want to wrap up with Stewart, but we were so delighted to have you there. And it was a huge success.
Thank you, Barbara, and thank you very much for asking me. It was a great opportunity, and I'm glad I only have a minute, because I probably only have a minute's worth of things to say. I hope that you will go see the poetry on windows in Camden and Rockport if you are local. The students worked really hard and they did great work. I was working with them by Zoom, so it was hard to tell how, it's so much harder to see how engaged they are, but it was wonderful to get feedback from the teachers and from the students saying that they enjoyed it. We worked on how to describe nature, so hopefully you'll see lots of sensory language and metaphors and similes. And we also worked on how to kind of inhabit nature and use the voice of something that you're imagining, from a worm to an ant to a squirrel to the ocean to the atmosphere, and have that speak. And we also thought a little bit about the idea of poems as windows, not just on windows, but showing things to the people passing through the streets that they wouldn't necessarily think of in the natural world. So I hope that you will find the poems to be windows into a different experience of nature and the students' thinking as you walk through and see them on windows. So yeah, it was a wonderful opportunity and wonderful students. And I have to pay tribute to the teachers at Camden Rockport Middle School, because the kids were just so ready to write and so well supported. So they're in good hands. Thank you, Barbara.
They really enjoyed it, and the whole process of editing, that's something when I was teaching writing that I really wanted my students to do. I mean, sometimes they would edit, 10 times. And these kids, 5th and 7th graders, really seem to appreciate that. So as I said, we hope to expand this. We have applied for a grant, and we'll see what happens, but we hope that we can bring this really magical work to all our kids. Stuart, I'd love to just first of all say thank you so much for this. It's absolutely been wonderful and fascinating, and I think there may be a couple more questions, so I'll turn it back to Julia to wrap up.
It looks like we've just had some wonderful comments in. Esperanza says, incredible poetry, looking forward to reading more of your work, grateful for your words. Yes, and a couple other folks too, who this was their first time really getting to spend some quality time with your poetry, Stuart. So once again, thank you for providing that. And if anyone would like to view this program again, we have recorded it, and I'll be posting it on the Camden Public Library Program's YouTube channel. It should be up by tomorrow. All right, I invite you to join us for future programs. You can find all of it at librarycamden.org. You can find information on librarycamden.org about Stuart's book. His new book is called Things Seem to Be Breaking. That's the Blackout Poetry we saw. And you can visit him online too. Lots of resources on Stewart Kestenbaum's website, so check that out. Thank you, Barbara, for bringing this all together tonight. And thank you all for spending the evening with us. Good night.
Thank you. Good night.